Everybody, Mike Williams upstairs to the right music. You know, I thought it would be a lot of fun to take time to look at my top 5 list of dream guitars that I would just love to have. On this list are guitars that I know I'll never get a chance to get a crack at because they are super hard to find, especially my number 1. However, it is good to have dreams sometimes, and to have your top 5 list of things you wish you could get in terms of guitars. So this is certainly a reflection of mine. It's subject to change, but for right now, it really does reflect what it is that I think would be a cool thing to own. Certainly, if I could get all 5, well, that would be too much. So coming in at number 5 is the Mad Cat guitar. Now, the Mad Cat guitar was made famous by Prince Nelson. This was the guitar that he bought in a parking lot before a concert from the back of a guy's car, trunk of a guy's car. This is a copy, actually, of a Telecaster that's made by a company called Horner that was produced in Japan through a company called Morse. Now, I know it sounds really confusing, and believe me, if you go through the story, the official story, it really is. But just suffice to say that these are really, really cool guitars that Prince made famous by playing for most of his life. Now, I would love to have one of these. I mean, when I was a kid and I would see him playing this, I would say, oh man, that is the coolest guitar ever. And it just sounded really crisp, and it's actually true. The voicing on a Mad Cat it's got a more of a, I would say, a twangy high end to it when you plug it in. And so it really is a very unique sound. It's based upon a Telecaster, but it's not exactly the same thing. But in any case, I would love to get one. So these will run you somewhere in the neighborhood of about $7,000. That's quite an expensive thing if you want to get one just like Prince's, if you can find one. They're extremely rare, so a lot of the guitars on my list are extremely rare, so my chances of getting one of these, not very good at all. Moving on to number 4 is the 2009 Les Paul R9. Now, there are magical years for production at the Gibson factory. Certainly 2008 and 2009 for the custom shop, they were producing some really excellent guitars. The R8s and R9s and the R0 you would say, RO. Those guitars were some of the finest that were being produced in years. Another well-known, for example, era of Gibson would also be the beginning of the 1990s to about the mid-1990s, the so-called Goodwood era. The gold top back here is one of those. This is definitely from the Goodwood era, certainly. This is 93. Certainly the guitars that are produced now are excellent examples. Not to knock anything about the ones currently being produced, but that 2008 and 2009 period was, one of those Goodwood type of era things, and I would love to have one of those guitars. One of my favorite YouTubers, Johan Segborn, has one of these, and I just enjoy listening to him play it on his YouTube videos, and so that's my number 4. At number 3 is the 1969 Gibson 335. Yes, I know, number 2 Gibson on this list, but there's a lot of Gibsons. I like Gibsons. What can I tell you? So in at number 3 is the 1969 335. As you know, the 335 was first introduced in 1958. It's known as the Thin Line. It was Gibson's idea to have a semi-acoustic electric guitar, and this was their answer to it, the Thin Line. A beautiful plan that worked for them. To this day, they're still producing these guitars. But the 1969 335 that's been played by Lee Ritenour, Larry Carlton, John Mayer, a lot of cats have played this 335. And I have to tell you, the 69 is a beautiful year. It is paint job on that sunburst for that year that is just to die for. Man, it's anything at all, I think, if you can find one in really good condition where you haven't got a lot of fading in that, terrible fading in that paint job, that sunburst is just absolutely to die for. And a beautiful sounding guitar, listen to Joni Mitchell's Court and Spark, to listen to Larry Carlton's work on using that 335, that 1969. That's Larry Carlton playing guitar on a lot of those tracks, especially on Help Me. So dig that. Another reason why I would just love to have one of those. I love that tone, that sound. I have a choice between getting the R9 and getting the 69, the 2009 R9 and the 1969 335. I'd have to go for the R9 just from a practical viewpoint. But I would love to own both. Now that 335, you can get them around the $8,000 to $9,000 range. So certainly not completely out of range for most people, but kind of out of range for most people. Certainly, you know, I don't know. I can see myself doing that, but you never know. I am trading up. As you know, I'm trying to get one or two excellent guitars as opposed to a bunch of okay guitars. Not to say that this is not an excellent guitar, it is, but there are actually steps above these, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen. In any case, moving on to number 2 is the Japanese-made Momo Say custom shop Les Paul. These guitars, I have to tell you, are the cat's meow. These guitars are produced in Matsumoto, Japan by custom builder Momo Say-san. He makes them by hand in the divisor factory there. These are excellent, excellent, beautiful guitars that they wind their own pickups, and their pickups, the Japanese pickups, if you've ever heard, like the Maxim pickups on my 1977 Greco here behind me, I've got to tell you, they are the most awesome sounding pickups you've ever heard. I have no doubt that Momo Say-san has not invested a little bit of time into making his sound fantastic as well. I, as you know, had aspirations to get this guitar. The trip to Japan, obviously because of the virus that shall not be named, has put that on indefinite hold, unfortunately. So I made that second deal when I was over in Amsterdam. That's why that was my plan B, actually. Unfortunately, it will be a while before I can even get a shot at doing this, but it is on my wish list. These guitars, if you can find them on Rock10 and eBay, they'll run you somewhere in the neighborhood of about $4,000 to $5,000. So they are well worth it because they are handmade from scratch, just it's custom shop quality. You get to pick the wood, you get to pick, you know, just a lot of neat things that you can do by getting one of these. In any case, that's my number 2. Coming in at number 1 is the 1982 Guitar Trader era Les Paul. Now, in the 1970s, the Les Pauls were falling out of favor because of the build quality. There was just a sacrifice of quality there. This is known as the Noland Era. Certainly one of the big problems with these guitars that Les Paul was producing was they weren't falling upon the old school stuff that, you know, made them a household name. The 58s, the 57s, the 58s, the 59s, the 60s, you know, and Les Pauls. And so a group of small business owners began to approach, starting in 1975, Gibson and saying, hey, look, can you make us a custom order of sets of 20 to 25, 50, whatever they had in mind, guitars that we'll design the specs on it because we want these to look exactly like the classic guitars did back in the 50s. Long neck tenons, ABR bridge, you name it, the works. Now the 1970s and the 1980s were the genesis of the reissue craze that we know of today. Gibson, when they began to see this demand for these more historic accurate guitars, so Gibson came out with the Heritage series. Now these had Tim Shaw pickups, which were, to this day, these pickups by themselves are going for $1,000 each. These Tim Shaws, because supposedly, much like the Japanese at much like the Japanese at Maxim Company, Tim Shaw really took his time and got an excellent sounding PAF that really had that tone from those guitars back in the day. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that these guitars that Gibson was designing had very little to do with the actual, reissues that they were the guitars that they were supposed to be reissues of, is what I'm trying to say. And they were kind of rejected by connoisseurs who began to take it upon themselves to again approach Gibson and say, hey, look, give us an opportunity to produce our own spec guitars that we will sell. We'll give you a bundle of money, which is always good for business, to make these to spec. We'll come by, we'll pick the wood, which they did, and we'll get to that in a minute. These two companies were Leo's Music in Oakland and the Guitar Trader in New Jersey. Now, these two guitar shops basically approached Gibson and said, hey, we want these custom spec guitars that are more like the originals. And, they, to some varying degree of success, they actually produced these guitars. Now, in the case of the Guitar Trader guitars, the guy who was running that particular organization had some actual PAFs that were pulled out of guitars. Because if you remember, this is the 1970s, where guys didn't give a crap about that old, what they consider sound. They wanted that really high-driven sound, so they were pulling those PAFs out of those, what we would consider to be vintage PAFs, out of their Les Pauls, and they were putting in those DiMaggio super distortions like I've got back here behind me. And, and nobody wanted those original PAFs because they weren't high output enough. They couldn't get that, blazing, Boston sound. Nobody wanted that. So this guy had apparently 20 sets of these, the guy at the Guitar Trader, and he threw those into the first original 20 that Gibson produced for him of these vintage spec guitars. So not only were they the first true accurate vintage, so the early R9s, for example, the prehistoric historics, I guess, is another way that you could look at that. I mean, in my case, that's not accurate, so don't quote me on that. But in any case, sounds right. These guitars really represent, especially when you have those true PAFs in them, you are looking at the closest thing at that period of time to getting your hands on 1959, other than what at that period, it'll cost you upwards of about $25,000 for a 1959 Les Paul. At that time, we all know now that anybody would gladly have scraped up the money to buy it at that price, because now the doggone thing is $225,000. I've played an actual Gibson R9, 1959 Les Paul. I've had the pleasure of playing one, and maybe I'll make a video of that one of these days. I'll ask my buddy if I can borrow it and show that to you. It certainly is something to see, but short of getting one of those, this case his is about $280,000, $300,000 guitar. You can get this guitar for $2,500 at that time in 1982, and so a tenth of the price. So these Guitar Trader guitars are now impossible to find. They are the holy grail of Les Pauls. if you can find an actual Guitar Trader Les Paul. I would love to have one that has the original, one of those original 20s that he threw in those vintage. They were just sitting around in a box. He had tore them out because somebody wanted to have a super distortion instead, which is crazy in our viewpoint. But you have to understand, back then they weren't exactly vintage guitars per se. They were just older models, I guess. You know, newer or older than vintage, I guess it would go. So in any case, so that's my top 5 list. Certainly some of them are possibly obtainable. Some of them are impossibly unobtainable. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoy bringing it to you. You guys take care of yourselves out there. Be very careful. Keep yourself safe. So something to think about. I'll say to you guys, take care, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Like the show? Well, show your support by subscribing and hitting the like button. See you later.